Hi everyone! In this video I'm going to be showing you how to draw whiskers in pastels. Now let's get straight into tip 1, and that is how to hold the pencil. I've frozen the recording here just so you can see exactly how I'm holding that pencil before we move on to the stroke itself. But my biggest tip here is hold it in the middle of the barrel. By holding it midway to 3/4 of the way further away from the lead, you're going to be able to get lighter pressure and a bit more purchase across that paper. Tip 2, and that is to roll the pencil. Now if you look at that barcode and the gold writing in the middle of the barrel, you'll notice that everything is always twisting. This again is one of the biggest things that's going to make a difference to how fine your lines are going to be. Tip 3, and that is the pressure. So depending on how much pressure is applied to the pencil is going to create a variation in the whiskers. The more pressure you apply, the thicker your line is going to be. The less pressure you apply, the finer that line is going to be. Now for me, the optimal pressure is when you run that pencil on the back of your hand, you shouldn't be able to really indent your skin. You just want it to glide across the surface. But what you do want to do is you want to lightly ease into the pressure and then ease off of the pressure at the end of the whisker stroke. So as you start the whisker, do very minimal pressure. As you get midway through, apply more pressure, and then you get to the end of the whisker and you ease off on that pressure. That's going to really help to create these natural long lines that are tapered at the beginning and the end. So tip 4, and that is variety. Look at how much they vary in the way that they curve, the direction, how long they are and how thick they are. This is really important to help make these whiskers look natural. Now the one thing that we don't want is to get in a habit of drawing all of the same looking lines, because the whiskers will start to look very fake. As the whiskers add so much to the portrait, we do want these to be as realistic as we possibly can. Look at how the whiskers are also overlapping other whiskers. That's also something that's really important. You know, random is really the key here. We don't want them to be equally spaced apart because again, they'll start to look fake. So before we jump into tip 5, I would really appreciate it if you could give the video a thumbs up if it's been useful so far. It really does help because it tells YouTube then that it's of interest, and then they're more likely to share it with other people. I also have the 6.5-hour tutorial available on Patreon of this tiger, so if you would like to follow along and draw this beautiful animal as well, I will link my Patreon in the description below. So tip 5, and that's leave the whiskers until the last layer. Now this is something that I mention in pretty much all of my tutorials here on YouTube and on Patreon. The reason being, the whiskers are overlapping everything else, so they should be left until the very last layer. Let's say I was to add the whiskers at the time where I was working on that part of the portrait. If I then haven't finished the layers underneath, I'm going to have to then draw around the whiskers that I've put in because I've added them in too early. Whereas if you leave them for the very last details, that last element that goes on the portrait, if you do feel like the fur underneath it needs to be tweaked, you can do that at the time and then add those whiskers in so they're always sitting on the very top. So tip 6, and that is that not all whiskers are white. In this case, most of them were because of the lighting, but I wanted to make sure that I added those tinier black whiskers in as well. So this is going to really depend on the animal that you're drawing and the reference photo that you're using. Quite often you might have a whisker that looks more of a mid-tone grey, but the centre and middle part of that whisker looks white. So all I would do is start off with the grey colour initially and then draw over that whisker on the mid portion to make that highlighted section in the middle. So I hope that the tips and techniques that I've shared here for drawing whiskers are useful. If they were, as I've mentioned earlier, if you could give the video a thumbs up, it really does help and I really do appreciate it. If you've got any art related questions, pop them in the comments below. I'm more than happy to help if I can. And if my slower in-depth tutorials are of interest, I've got a Patreon library on my website, so you can see all of the tutorials that are available there as soon as you sign up. So if that's of interest, I'll link that Patreon library in the description below as well. Now I do also have a YouTube time-lapse version with voiceover of this tiger from start to finish, so if you'd like to see that as well, then I will link that in the description too. If you'd like to get notified of the content that I upload, hit the subscribe and the bell button, and I'm going to be uploading another video next week.